If you will, go ahead and be finding your seat, and we're going to get started here in just a moment. If you go ahead and be finding your seat.
They had the sign go off.
Are we ready to go? Okay, is Trevor back with the PowerPoint? All right. Well, I recognize that a rather lengthy discussion of Israel, but I think that's the mega sign, because once you get that one down, then you know, hey, we're living in that generation. We're living in the generation that saw Israel, and we're seeing the fulfillment of those things, so that's enough information. But I think there's another mega sign, and that is there's going to be a one world government in the last days. Just when the same way when Jesus left, Israel was a nation, and there was a one world government overruled by a Caesar who was making people bow down to worship him and putting people to death who would not bow down to worship him. All those events are going to be coming back into play when Jesus Christ comes again. So there's going to be a one world government. That government is talked about in chapter number 13 of Revelation. So go to Revelation in chapter number 13. It's not practical, nor would it be productive, I think, to just the short period of time that we got to get into very deep discussions about the deeper images of Revelation, but to get the overall view of what's the world going to be like. The other trees. There's going to be a coming together of the nations. Israel's not only blooming and budding in her land, but the other nations, what's beginning to happen there. In chapter number 13, beginning of verse 1, it says, "Then I stood on the sand of the sea. I saw a beast rising out of the sea." Now, we all know who this beast is from context throughout the book of Revelation. It's Antichrist. He's known as the son of perdition, the man of sin. We see him as various other names as well, but he's the beast. He's the little horn of Daniel. So this beast was rising out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 7 crowns. That's kingdoms. They're going to come together, okay? All these kingdoms are going to come together. And his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. This goes back to Daniel's prophecy of 4 world empires, which we'll describe a little bit later, okay? A leopard was one of those. It was represented by Greece. His feet were like a bear. That also was another image in the book of Daniel, and that was the Medo-Persian Empire. And his mouth like the mouth of a lion. That was the Babylonian Empire. The dragon, now the dragon obviously is Satan. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. So this man that is to come is going to be the right-hand man of Antichrist. I personally believe that there have been 2 men that are going to be possessed by the devil himself. One was who? Judas Iscariot. It says, and Satan entered into him, the one who betrayed our Lord. I believe that the casting down of Satan during this tribulation period to the earth, that he takes up residence inside of the Antichrist. A false though I guess it may be true in a sense, resurrection takes place. The Antichrist is wounded, seems like he's dead. The spirit of Satan comes into this individual, and it's a miraculous resurrection. And the world is going to look to this man as, boy, he is the one that we need. He's going to have great power and great authority. He's known as the Antichrist, the beast. Then verse 3. And I saw at his head as if it had been mortally wounded, that is, he died, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon, that is Satan, who gave authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? This is what Satan has always wanted. A one world that bows before him and worships him. He took the kingdom away from him. We actually gave it to him. Adam and Eve even gave him the kingdom because it was given to mankind. When Adam and Eve heeded the voice of the serpent, Satan, they gave the kingdom over to Satan. He's always wanted this. He's tried to build one world governments all the way through the ages. He's tried to bring up these nations, and God has always thwarted his attempts. But there's going to be a time when he's going to have a one world nation. God's going to remove his people off the earth. There's not going to be the restraining work of the Holy Spirit, and he's going to have his way, and he's going to do it through this Antichrist. He's going to rule and be worshipped upon the earth. We call this the one world order, one world government, okay? In verse number 4 it says, saying, who is like the beast, who is able to make war against him? And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. That was spoken about Daniel as well, when Daniel spoke about him. And he's given authority to continue for 42 months. That's 3.5 years. In other words, this is how it's going to work. There's going to be a one world government that will begin. And for about 3.5 years, they're going to try to bring peace upon the earth. But 3.5 years into that, this guy is going to rise up and say, I don't need any help governing. I'm the boss. It's going to be his from there on. Don't stop and think, don't start thinking that this is unique. That's exactly how the Roman Empire did it. The Roman Empire began as a republic. But then eventually the Caesars rose up and said, hey, I don't need a republic. I don't need a Congress. I don't need a ruling board. I am Caesar and I'm in charge. And just did away with the government. And one man ruled over the Roman Empire. And by the way, many of those Caesars set themselves up to be God, to be worshipped as God. So this is not something new. Our forefathers had to deal with this. The early Christians had to deal with this all the time, with some emperor saying, I'm God, you better come and worship me or you're going to be beheaded, you're going to be killed. And so he's going to do this again for 42 months. So that last 3.5 years of the tribulation period. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwelled in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And the saints here, by the way, is Israel, not the church. The authority was given to him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has ear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. It is as God has predicted, everything is going to happen just the way he says. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. We've got to wait till God fulfills his program. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. He exercises all authority of the first beast in his presence, and he causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. Now, who is this? This is the false prophet. 2 men, an unholy trinity, if you will. Satan, the Antichrist, and the false prophet, the unholy trinity. Satan always counterfeits. He's got nothing new to give to the world. He's just going to have a holy, unholy trinity here. So Satan, Antichrist, and then the false prophet. This false prophet comes out of the earth, which many take to be, it's going to actually be a Jewish individual that is going to be fulfilling that responsibility. A Jew who has turned his back upon his nation. And then he says he gave authority to make everybody bow down and worship the beast in verse 12. Verse 13, notice this. Jesus predicted this. He performs great signs. How does he do these signs? Not through God, but through the workings of Satan. Satan has some power. He's not unlimited in his power, but God allows him a certain amount of power to make even fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he is granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast, who was wounded by the sword and lives. And he granted power to give breath to the image of the beast. This beast is going to look like it really came to life, this image. And by the way, again, this is not unique. Didn't Nebuchadnezzar declare himself to be king of the world? And then he made a great big image and told everybody, bow down and worship this image. These are not things that have not happened in world history. Satan's got nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun. These are just things that are going to be happening in the last day. This one world government's going to come up, but this guy's going to have such great authority because of technology we're going to describe and things are going to happen. He's going to control the whole world, and he's going to have authority. He's going to set up an image, and everybody's going to be forced to bow down and worship this image or to be destroyed. Then notice this, he says in verse 15, he was granted power to give breath to the image, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark in the right hand and on the right forehead. I won't mention this again. What I'm saying is, people aren't going to be bothered during this time by having another mark, whether it's a mark as we see kind of the UPC code, whether that's that kind of mark or whether it's a chip, which I personally believe it's going to be. People are no big deal in this generation. Satan, again, is preparing the world to receive these marks. Verse 17, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark of the name of the beast or the number of his name. Now here's wisdom. Let him who understands, has understanding, calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. And I'm here to tell you, we're not even going to discuss 666. So don't keep coming up and ask me what does 666 mean. There's 666 ways you can look at that, okay, is how that is interpreted. So we see that there's going to be a one world government. Also, you can go to Revelation chapter 17 if you want to look at verse 9 and 10. Look at those verses, and again gives us the history of the world. Now what John is doing is he's looking in the future and he's talking about a future world government that's coming. John also goes back as God gives him information and he talks about the world in retrospect. These governments, these one world systems that have come along. But I want you to notice, he says in Revelation chapter 17 verse 9, here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. That is, this woman is a false religious system we call Mystery Babylon. It's the mystery religions, the false religions of the world, and it's set up on top of governments. These governments that have come and gone that are going to support her. Now notice verse 10. There are also 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue for a short time. Well, I can tell you how long he continues. 7 years, a short time. His government's going to last about that long. Now, if you were to go into history, here are the kingdoms he's talking about. These are the kingdoms who ruled over Israel, were a harm to God's people, and basically ruled their part of the world during that time. And ruled the Middle East, where Jerusalem is and where Israel is. Here's the kingdoms. Egypt. And notice he says in that phrase, these are already gone. The 5 have fallen. And it's Egypt, Assyria. Now somebody tell me, what did the Assyrians do to the Jews? They destroyed the northern kingdom, right? The Assyrians came in and destroyed the northern kingdom. Then it was Babylon, and Babylon destroyed the southern kingdom and controlled the Middle East and controlled Jerusalem's fate. Then there was Persia, and then there was Greece. And there was a Grecian one that Daniel talks about, Antiochus Epiphanes. He actually describes 200 years before it all happens, this one that is to come who has a deep hatred for the Jews, who's like the Antichrist in the last days, but he's not the Antichrist. But boy, he's a picture of it. And it was Antiochus Epiphanes who did great harm to the Jews. Those have come and have fallen. Then he says, one is. One is right now. And that is Rome. When John was writing the book of Revelation, who was in charge of the world? Who was the one world government? Rome. Okay? He says, let me tell you something. There's another one that is to come. So there's going to be 7 kingdoms. There's one that is not yet. There's one that is still to come. And it's going to be a revived Roman government under the Antichrist that's going to be revived. And that is going to be during this 7-year tribulation period that they'll have their greatest impact. They're already at work in the world. The spirit of the Antichrist is already at work in the world. And they're already moving towards a one world government. But one day the world itself is going to recognize their right to make decisions over sovereign nations. And then will rise up the Antichrist. In fact, if you go one more verse, it says this: the beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is the 7. It is of the 7, and is going into perdition. Now, here's what it means. The 7th world empire will be revived Roman Empire. Daniel prophesies that. There's going to be a world empire. But the 8th is going to be Antichrist. But really, he says, he's really of the 7th. He rules over the 7th empire, which is Rome. So again, Rome was in charge when Jesus was crucified. Rome was dominating the world. So there's going to be a revival of the one world empire. There's going to be then one who's going to lead it for 3.5 years. But then he will cast off all restraint. I don't have time to talk about this, but he's going to also cast off all religion. The harlot is going to be cast off, destroyed. Antichrist will take control of all that the Roman Catholic Church has, all the charge of everything that the Muslims have, all their treasures, trinkets. He's going to take control of everything, and because he has the power to do so, he's going to say, you can no longer worship. Everyone then must worship the Antichrist. From there on, there's only one man that rules the world, not a government. One man rules the world through a government. There's only one world religion, and there's going to be a one world economy. Now that's what we're going to discuss throughout the rest of this message. So Daniel's writing, when he wrote about it, did not speak about Assyria, did not speak about Egypt, but he did mention those last 4, and that is Babylon, Medo-Persians, Greece, and the Roman Empire. And then he mentions the last one would be a revived Roman Empire. Now, so what has to be in place before Christ comes again? Now, I'm not talking about the rapture, but before Christ comes again. Well, there has to be a one world government. Before there's a one world government, there has to be a desire for people to give up their sovereignty as a nation and place themselves under the authority of a world government. There has to be a need or a desire, and that desire is going to be for peace and security, peace and safety. So when the world is a boiling pot and people don't know what to do, and the governments of the world are corrupt, and they can't get things done, and American government is divided and divisive and driving a wedge between all the people, and there seems to be no answer to this, people will look to a one world government. The world was like this when we had World War I and World War II. You had a boiling pot in the world. And all of a sudden, a nation rises up, the Prussian or the German Empire, and we have a world war. Then they rise up again a few decades later, and we have another world war. In order to keep that from happening again, the American government, on October the 12th, 1948, a resolution was passed in our Congress. It was passed both sides, both chambers. And it was on the UN. And it had just recently been established a short period before that. By the way, two former presidents, or they actually will be future presidents, was Gerald Ford and JFK actually signed this. And I don't disagree with it necessarily. There were 111 supporters of this in our government. And it says this: it is the sense of the Congress that it should be a fundamental objective of the foreign policy of the United States to support and strengthen the United Nations and to seek its development into a world federation, open to all nations. Now here's what they had in mind: with defined and limited powers to preserve peace and to prevent aggression, that is safety. So peace and safety. Get that? Again, that's the very terminology. When they say peace and safety, no, when they're clamoring for peace and safety, they won't preserve peace and prevent aggression through the enactment, interpretation, enforcement of world law. Now, again, I don't really necessarily condemn that. They just say, hey, we need some governing body that the nations are a part of, that if somebody like the Germans rise up again, or the Russians, because there was Russian aggression happening immediately after World War II, they could see on the horizon Russia was going to be a problem. We need a League of Nations. We need a United Nations to keep that from happening. So we need a governing body, but with limited powers, with very defined role. And it wasn't take over our economies and take over our religion, but a very defined role. So that begins, again, this idea that we need a world government. Then Albert Einstein said this, about basically the same time: with all my heart, I believe that the world's present system of sovereign nations can only lead to barbarianism, war, and inhumanity. Mankind's desire for peace, again, peace, can be realized only by the creation of a world government. That was in the New York Times, September 15th, 1945. So here's one of the most brilliant minds that people look to of that generation. And remember, he was German. He was driven out. He had to flee his homeland. He saw what radical patriotism could do to a nation. He saw what could happen if the wrong man gets in control of a nation such as Hitler did. He said, what we need is a world government. And I guess from his point of view, I would probably think the same thing if I didn't have an understanding of prophetic history. Then in a speech given on November the 5th, 1964, so we're moving along the line here, Martin Luther King Jr. said this: I would work to bring about universal disarmament and set up a world police force through the United Nations that could handle any problem that arise. I'm not at all an anarchist, and I don't think man will ever come to the point where we will not need some checks. I would also consider some form of a world government as we grow and come to see the oneness of mankind and the geographical oneness of the world made possible by man's scientific and technological ingenuities. Look at what we're going to look to. The one world government, we're going to look to science and technology to implement this, to create this one world. We're not looking to God to create a one world government, which, by the way, He is going through Jesus. You realize there's coming a one world government. When all these governments fade away, there's coming a one world government. It's going to crush the feet of that statue and going to destroy all the nations of the world, and He's going to set up His throne. We're looking for a one world government. Sitting on the throne will be the Christ, not the Antichrist. But they're going to look to science and technology to establish this one world system. More and more, we're going to have to try to see our oneness in terms of brotherhood. This does not mean that everyone has to agree at every point. There can be a world government where diversity can exist, and this world lessen man's tension that we face today. And it would also enable everybody to understand that we are clothed in a single garment of destiny. And whatever affects one nation directly in the world indirectly affects us all. So again, this is not a new idea. It goes back centuries and centuries and centuries. But in America, we've been ruggedly nationalistic We're a nation. We're the greatest nation in the world. We got pride. We want to make America great. And really, that we want America to be a great nation and a light and salt to the earth. It hasn't been the last several decades, but that's what we want. Now, the American Humanist Association, which, by the way, they drive more of the policies of our education by far than any influence from Christianity. These are the people who drive our education, both our kids going to school in the primary years and also in colleges, okay? And this is what their manifesto says, 1973. We deplore the division of humankind on nationalistic grounds. We have reached a turning point in human history where the best option is to transcend the limits of national sovereignty and to move towards the building of a world community in which all sectors of human family can participate. Thus, we look to the development of a system of world laws and a world order based upon transnational federal government. Now, they're just bold in saying it. Now, if you wonder why your kids can go off to college believing the things we believe about nationalism and come out of there 4 to 8 years later and they've been reprocessed to think on a global terminology, it is because they hold most of the professorships, these people in those places. They are literally training our kids to be global community. That is already starting in the primary schools, grade schools, for those of us my age, grade schools. They're already starting these sort of things, to think globally, not nationally. Now, you and I remember this, that a few years back, we had an absolute internationalist running for president, Hillary Clinton. She made it very plain, open borders. We don't want any walls. We want to be a part of the global village, the global community. Then we had a nationalist, Trump. Okay? No. We want to keep America great. We want to make America great. We need to turn our energy away from all this stuff going on out there, and we just need to make America what she needs to be. And he included in that, I believe, even a spiritual aspect of renewal on there. Boy, he barely won that thing. In fact, most people didn't think he was going to. I think God gave him the victory for one reason. It's because he moved the capital city, moved our consulate to the capital city, and recognized Israel as a sovereign nation and Jerusalem as belonging to them. But it didn't last but one term. And you have even a greater globalist in Biden. Now, I'm not trying to be political. He's made it very plain. That's where we're moving. Why do you think he wants to tear down that wall? Why they want open borders? They don't want a nation with national boundaries and so forth. They've got to destroy America so that we have a desire to move into. And he received over half the votes in America. And people knew this. You say, well, I didn't know it. Well, you should have known it. I mean, it was a very clear globalist, nationalist. And the Globalist Party won. Now, in his memoirs, written shortly before his death, David Rockefeller, you probably recognize the Rockefeller name, he said this: some even believe we, the Rockefeller family, are part of a secret cabal working against the best interest of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalist, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that is the charge, I stand guilty and am proud of it. Now, people talk about me and others like me that, man, you're just a conspiracy theorist. You just see a conspiracy behind everything. I'm not a theorist. He said it. We've been working for generations. We've been trying to get this done. Yes, that's who I am. They're bold enough to say it now. Why? Because they got the majority. The majority of the world wants a one world government. The majority of the world is living in utter poverty with dictators and leaders over them that are so corrupt. They're living on the high side of all things, eating good foods, doing what they want to do, and the vast majority of their population is starving, has no health care. The world's in a mess. And these people want somebody at least to step in and fix the problems. And so the world is set up, but even America is set up for this. Now, I couldn't confirm this quote here, and thank God for Trevor. He helped me to do the PowerPoint on this thing, but we couldn't find, but it was from 1991. I couldn't find the source of this quote. But listen very intently to this quote from David Rockefeller. 1991, so 30 years ago. We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite. Notice that. He's bold to say it. This government of supernatural government or supernatural government that supersedes all other governments of an intellectual elite. And world bankers, a political system and an economic system, is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. So, man, look at the world. Look at all the wars. Look at the starvation. Look at what's going on in the world. Surely having a world of people who understand how things work, these intellectual elites, surely having a government of people who know what they're doing and have the world's best interests at heart, obviously, and world bankers who can control the economic system, surely we would prefer those. And he is right. The world is set up for a one world government. They're ready for it. Some are praying for it and looking forward to it. There's a World Government Summit that meets. It was founded in 2013, and it meets every year in Dubai. Elon Musk, I saw a portion this year is Harrison Ford is promoting it this year. I went through some of the speakers, and I can't remember the year, maybe 2016 or 2017. It is amazing how many professors, now from British Columbia as well, but how many professors from the United States of America were keynote speakers in that thing. And they're talking about, again, how to better govern the world. So these things are going on. Number two, this will take on an economic responsibility. Not only do we need a global group who will keep things from getting out of hand so there won't be wars and rumors of wars, so we can have peace on the earth and so we can have a semblance of safety on the earth, but also we want everybody to prosper. So when this government is in place, it needs to have the ability to be able to control the economy so that Americans are not throwing away more food than other people get to eat. So we're not wasting more on gambling than an entire family has to feed its family for a whole year. We can wait on a weekend. We can go blow off more money doing some activity we want to do than what it takes to feed a whole family in some countries. That's not fair, right? That's not fair. And probably most of us say, well, yeah, you're right. It's really not fair. So you got some countries that are just doing great. They think, we're going to talk about this in just a moment, our support for our government is based upon borrowed money. We're borrowing the money, okay? And we're living high on the hog in America. And even within the American system, there are some who are the upper echelon, if you will, and those of us in the middle, we're all doing great. But there are a lot of people starving. In fact, half the world goes to bed at night hungry. Not that they don't get some food, they just don't get enough. And a vast majority are malnourished. And so there needs to be some kind of a system that is fair so that we can take the food from one country or from one group of people, and we can help another group of people in the world. And they want the government to do that, not religious institutions to do that. So to control the world population and to keep people in line with you, you have to control the economy. To control the economy, you have to have everybody's personal information in a massive computer system, right? You got to have a massive computer complex that has everybody's information on them. Do we have the ability for that today? Certainly we do. Okay? So you got to get everybody's information. So how do you get everybody's information? Well, you don't waste a good pandemic. You get as much information as people are getting vaccinated. Whether you got vaccinated or non-vaccinated, there is no spiritual connotation for me whatsoever to the vaccination. I had not got it, don't need it, probably won't get it unless I absolutely have to. I just don't see any need for me. I've got a good, healthy body. You say, well, yeah, but you're not concerned about us. I'm concerned about you. Just stay away from me, all right? If you feel like I'm a plague. But, yeah, it just used to you could make up your own mind on this. But you see, we're coming to a point where you're not going to get to make up your own mind whether you get vaccinated or not, or whether you take a chip or not. We're getting set up to where they can control. Now, how can they force people to get a vaccination or force people to get a chip, whether it's the mark of the beast? Now, when it comes time for the mark of the beast, you will know you're choosing Antichrist and his government. It'll be a very clear decision, just like it's a clear decision to choose Jesus Christ. So it's not like, oh man, they slipped one in on me there. No, if you got vaccinated, you didn't receive the mark of the beast, okay? I promise you. But what do you need to do there? Well, you need to be able to control the economy, control people's pocketbooks. It's pretty amazing. They're getting all this information, and now they've gone from adults, now they're wanting all youth to get it. And then they want your children to get it, which, by the way, they're getting the information of your children through vaccinations as well. And so they're going to have all this information. It's going to go into a world system where they have everybody in the world system. You can never get out of it. There are incentives being offered to get vaccines. There's bounties being paid. This is kind of a funny article. Notice the heading: lotteries, discounts, and beer among incentives being offered to increase vaccination. That's a real article. Okay. I think that was ABC News, wasn't it, Trevor? That was on ABC News. And so they're offering people money. Bonuses at work for these large corporations. They were forcing large corporations to get vaccinated. Everybody has to get vaccinated. And so they wanted their people to get vaccinated, so they would pay them extra, give them a bonus if you will get vaccinated. Or other incentives like you can keep your job if you get vaccinated. Okay? Then there's the negative things. You'll lose your job. You're either going to get this shot or you're out of here. They're paring down the non-compliant in our military. Because if you're military and you don't take the vaccination, you're gone. So they're getting rid of anybody that doesn't step in line with what this group, whoever it is, CDC, government, who is it, that is forcing these things upon the military in the United States of America. That if you don't have a vaccination, then you're gone. So if you've got 10, 12, 15 years, and you're looking to just a few years to get invested or whatever it's called, to have retirement, full retirement, you either take it or you lose on these things. And so the media outlets, I mean, oh, by the way, you know what they're going to start doing? This is without a doubt, and this already started in some countries and some places. If you don't take the vaccination, you can't come to the hospital if you're sick. You can't come to the hospital. In fact, hospitals have been told, we only have so many beds, so take only the vaccinated, because they tried to prevent this. And those who wouldn't take the vaccination, they're on their own. They should have got a vaccination. It's their own fault. And so if you don't take the vaccination, stop and think about this. What if your insurance says we're not going to insure you? You know, Obamacare would do that. We're not going to insure you unless you take the vaccination and do the annual things that they require. If it requires 3, then you got to take 3. Or we're not going to pay out. You can't have it. Or your insurance begins to deny you because you won't take it. Of course, then in some countries it's higher taxation. Some countries are already saying, if you don't take the vaccination, you're going to have higher taxes. And here's their thought process, because they have a national health care system that all of the people pay in. But because you won't take the vaccination, you're a plague upon the whole system. You're the problem. You're creating an issue for everybody else, and so you're going to pay more for your premiums for these things. You say, well, Donnie, you think all those things are happening? They're happening. Most of you can see these things, just do a little study. Yes, they want to make sure everybody stays in line and does exactly, or it's going to affect you economically. On December the 24th, that was last year, 2021, everyone on the USS Milwaukee, that is one of our ships, had been fully vaccinated. They were scheduled to deploy to South America. The next day, they had to pull over, and I can't remember what port they were at, but they couldn't go any farther because there had been an outbreak of COVID. So if you think the vaccination is going to prevent you from getting COVID, you say, well, it'll keep the symptoms from being worse than they are. I'm not saying that for anybody. I mean, maybe it was. I can't tell you. I'm not smart enough to speak on that. But I'm telling you, it doesn't stop the virus. It's cruise ships. In order to go on a cruise ship, you have to have a vaccination. And cruise ships have had outbreaks, first from their staff and then from the people they're hosting. They've had outbreaks, and even though every one of them had to have the vaccination before they got on. So you have to be able to control the economy, which means there's got to be a currency that all people recognize. Every currency that has ever not been backed by something solid, that is gold or land or some property, every currency that's ever been printed has always failed. Because when the government needs money, what does it do? Print it. Print it. You can only do that so long. And inflation, hyperinflation, during the days of the Antichrist, you'll work all day long to get enough to buy a loaf of bread. All day long, it describes. You can look that up for yourself later, Revelation chapter number 6. Okay? Just all day long to just get a loaf of bread that you can feed your family. So hyperinflation is going to happen. All these things are coming to pass, but they need to be able to track all the buying and the selling. And so they're getting all this information together. But for it to work, you have to have people using some kind of a digital marker rather than cash in hand, because you can't track cash in hand. Don't raise your hand. How many of you in this room seldom, if ever, use cash? Most, probably. And I'll promise you, if you're probably in the 40-year and below, you seldom ever use cash. Maybe for something small. But most every one of us, all people pretty much use a credit card, a debit card. Now they're using their phone or a digital watch that they just scan. Soon that information will be put underneath the skin, where you don't even have to have a digital watch or a phone. You've always got your information with you. And so that's going to happen. We have the technology for that to happen. Another thing is you got to control the food as well, and on the economic level. You got to control the food. The billionaires are buying up much of the food source. You notice the small stores are going out. This is in almost every, to be able to control the economy, you get rid of the small stores who won't be compliant, and you force the large stores to do what they're going to do. You got to vaccinate all your people, or you got to do this. And so all is moving to Amazon or to some source like this. All the little mom and pop stores are going to be fading away pretty soon. And so you got to be able to control that. But they're buying up the food sources. And again, I don't want to be scary to you, but if you can't control guns, what do? You buy up all the ammunition, or you control the ammunition where people can't get ammunition. Ammunition is shooting through the roof. What you could buy 10 years ago in ammunition is 3 times the cost or 4 times the cost now. And so you just don't have access to that. So if people won't be compliant, you can't buy or sell. You can't participate in society. Okay? And so that's where we're at economically. But then very quickly, you also have to somehow settle the religious animosity that we have in the world. How many of you have seen these symbols? I see them on cars all the time. I see them posted in various places. That top one it literally says coexist. Now, that's the Muslims, the peace sign. India, the Star of David is, of course, Israel. I is, I don't remember. Of course, then you've got T on the end as the cross and so forth. This is the idea that we need to have a one world religion. We need to bring the peoples together. Because after all, most of the wars of the past have been because of religious reasons. And so we need to somehow settle and make sure that we have a system in place whereby we have tolerance. That next one is tolerance. Believe in it. So tolerance. It used to be that religion and the main purpose of your religion was to seek truth, to discover truth, to discover what it is that life is about. How does one know they have eternity? Whether you were a Muslim or whether you were a Jew or whether you are a Christian or whatever religion, the seeking of truth. Now that is no longer the case. In fact, set aside truth, the great pursuit of religion now is to be tolerant. To be tolerant of every idea. And tolerance in itself has the connotation of I'm tolerating you. I don't agree with you, but I tolerate you. Somebody say, well, how's Patty doing? Well, she's tolerable. That's not a good thing to say, is it? Well, she's tolerable. Okay. Well, there is a negative connotation to tolerance in the sense, I don't agree with them, but I'm not going to go over and burn down their house. I'm not going to kill them. They can believe what they want to believe. But now tolerance means, no, you've got to accept their understanding as truth, as valid as your understanding of truth. And so people are so messed up in the world. Believe it or not, probably the religious leader of the world, or one of the greatest, has the most influence, is a woman by the name of Oprah Winfrey. More people get their theology from Oprah than they do from any other source. Listen to what Oprah Winfrey says. One of the mistakes that human beings make is believing that there is only one way. That's a mistake. Let me stop right there. Her verbiage here is a direct quote, and it's going to be a little confusing here in just a moment. That one's not confusing. Jesus made a mistake, or the Bible's wrong, one of the two, when he said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. There's only one way. So we make a mistake in believing that there's only one way for there to be saved. Now, she claims to be a Christian. She goes ahead and says, we don't accept that there are diverse ways to being human beings, and many ways, many paths to what you call God. That her path might be something else, and when she gets there, she might call it light. But her loving and her kindness and her generosity brings her to the same point that it brings you. End quote. So basically, just be a good person. Just be generous. Just be kind. A works righteousness. Just try to be a good person. Whether you're Hindu or whether you're Jewish or whether you're Muslim, just be a good person. That's all that really matters. And it's going to bring you to the same place it brought her. Lie of the devil. It'll bring you to hell if you want to follow her. But you want to follow Jesus? He is the way into the kingdom. He is the truth about life and eternity. He is the life. He is life. And there's no life apart from Jesus Christ. And so we can be tolerant if we want to in the sense of their understanding of it, but all that does is allow people to believe the lie of the devil and perish. Our job as Christians is to warn them. No, there is, in a loving, kind, generous way, there is a way that leads to everlasting life. Now, just a couple of points for you very quickly. Are you ready to meet Jesus? Are you ready to stand before Him? I do not give these things to you to scare you. In fact, the Bible says, for God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind, able to think these things through. I don't want you to be fearful of anything, but I do want you to consider, do you know Jesus? If you don't, be very afraid. Have a relationship with Jesus. Acknowledge Him as your Lord. Number two, are you living a righteous, holy life? Are you living a life that is pleasing to God? Or are you so connected up to the world that you would be described more worldly than you would godly? Are you living a life that produces inside you the righteousness of Christ? 1 John chapter 3 says this, Beloved, now we are the children of God. It has not yet been revealed what we shall be. But we know that when He is revealed, we shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is. And everyone who has this hope in Him, in Christ, purifies himself, just as He is pure. If you have the hope that Jesus Christ is coming and coming soon, or meet you in death or the rapture, then purify your life. Number three, are you training your children in righteousness or worldliness? Are you training your kids that they're going to be more familiar with the way of the world than the way of righteousness? Most families are more concerned that their kids have the name brand clothes, drive the nice cars when they get 16, have all that the world has, send them off to secular institutions to be re-educated. They're more concerned that their kids be popular and enjoy their lives than they are that they're righteous individuals, that they're living a godly life. Number four, are you investing your time, talents, and treasures in eternal or temporal things? Where does most of your time go? Where does most of your talents use for? What are you using your treasures for? What the things that you have of value? How are you using these things? Are they for eternal things or temporal things? Folks, it's far too late in the day for us to be messing around with these things. We better reevaluate how we're living life, because Jesus is coming soon, and you clinging to this world is not going to be something He's going to be pleased with. And finally, are you regularly telling people about the need for salvation? We're in the know. We're not like those who are going to be caught off guard. We understand the signs of the time. We know where this is headed. We know Jesus is coming soon. Are we telling people about Jesus? Do you have at least a goal or an agenda that at least regularly, routinely, if not daily, ever occasionally talking to people about spiritual things, helping them to understand that Jesus is the Lord and they need a relationship with Him, or they also are going to go through a time of great tribulation on the earth? That's what prophecy conferences are about. Not just to fill us with wisdom or knowledge of all these events or to scare us. It's to help us to evaluate our life in light of the times in which we live. And it's time that we awake and be sober-minded and live out the Christian life. All right, I promised, but I just am having a hard time keeping my promise, that there would be time for question and answers. So I've got about 3 minutes, so make a question short if you got a question on these things. I've done all the talking, so anyone got a question on one world or a question on the Israel as a nation? Something I may have confused you on? Everybody's praying. Somebody don't ask anymore, please. They've got the red heifer. In fact, they've already certified the red heifers, and all they need to do, 9 red heifers have already been sacrificed throughout the generations. This, of course, according to Maimonides from the 12th century. 9 red heifers have already been sacrificed and used in Jewish ceremonies up until the time that they were cut off at the temple. And they believe that the last 10th one that will be sacrificed and used for the for the Messiah temple will be the last one. And so they already have a heifer ready to go. They've got a herd of red heifers ready to go. And all they need to do is have the temple. They'll slay it. the heifer, and use the ashes. They'll put a little bit of ash in some water, and they'll use that water to get the temple, to certify the priest and so forth, sanctify the priest. Now, that was actually not a red heifer. That was actually, now as far as my study, that was actually a lamb on the day of Passover. They wouldn't let them do it at the temple because they're not a temple, but down below in David's Sun Center, they were allowed to have an official, non-official Passover. They've been trying to do this for years, and now they are offering, but not on the Temple Mount because there's not a temple. So it's really not a legitimate, but they're going through yes, they're doing the sacrifices. They trained the priest in the school I was talking about. They've trained the priest how to sacrifice the animals, how to catch the blood, how to do all from the book of Moses. So all these things are in place. I mean, all they need is a temple, and they'll get that, I think, after the rapture happens. Yes. The question, if you didn't hear, they're doing all this because they don't think Jesus is coming. The answer is yes. The Jewish nation does not recognize Jesus as their Messiah, so they're building all this, doing all this, so the Messiah will come and establish his kingdom. They don't realize they're building it for the Antichrist, that he's going to take control of it. And that temple will be destroyed completely, and a new temple will be built during the millennium, according to chapter 40 through 48 of Ezekiel. If you need to go get your kids, please go get your kids and youth. And if you need to go ahead. If you got another question, you're welcome to come up, and I'll be glad to answer your question, all right? God bless you. We're going to start with a meal at 5 o'clock tonight. Everybody is welcome. Got plenty of food. Come at 5. We're going to start right at 6 and be through right about 7.